Welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. This is part 2 of our Q&A for June 2024. We've got Amazon Prime Day coming down the pike. What kind of discounts can we expect on CPUs, on GPUs, on motherboards, gaming monitors, and other cool PC gaming gear? We'll also talk about your GPU. Is it going to be obsolete in just a couple years when all of these Unreal Engine 5 games like Hellblade 2 hit? Then even an RTX 4090 struggles to run. Remember, if you get value out of this video, give it a like, it makes a huge difference to the channel, and of course subscribe. Click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. With that, let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows licenses and that terrible Activate Windows watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key and get a Windows 10 or 11 OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 25% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom! Windows is fully licensed for a crazy low price. And Windows 10 can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. And they have Microsoft Office licenses too. Use the links in the video description. All right, let's talk about Amazon Prime Day coming. Huge sales on GPUs, CPUs, huge sales on PC components, gaming monitors, and other things. Skyfighter writes in and asks, is now a good time to start scouting for PC parts with Amazon Prime Day coming up in July? Do I think the Ryzen 7600 or the RX 7800 XT are going to get good discounts? Zuki asks, what about 1440p gaming monitors? And Watchtell and others basically, what about all the cool PC discounts coming down the pike? Let's start off with, when is Amazon Prime Day? It typically takes place in July. Now, at the time I'm doing this, the dates, official dates have not yet been announced, but it's usually second to third week. It's always on a Tuesday and a Wednesday in the past. Now, obviously they could change that. They could do it differently this year, but that's what we're expecting. Sometime probably around the beginning to middle of July on a Tuesday and Wednesday. What happens first is on the Monday before that, a lot of other retailers that want to compete with Amazon will also start throwing sales. So typically it kicks off with Newegg's Fantastic Sale on that Monday. And then we have Amazon Prime Day, Tuesday and Wednesday, and a lot of other retail outlets like Best Buy and others will also jump in there with their own sales at the same time. And we have seen huge discounts, absolutely huge discounts, as big as Black Friday in previous years. In fact, going back and looked at a couple of deals that we posted last year, that was originally when the RX 6700 XT got down to $299. And that was like the insane deal at the time, because this GPU was like $350, $360, $370. So that was a significant discount. Those are the kinds of discounts I would expect to see. Now, I will say in terms of AMD versus NVIDIA GPUs, not as many NVIDIA GPU discounts out there, although I will say something like a Zotac, here we go. For Zotac, for instance, they often do discount their NVIDIA GPU. So if you're open to buying a Zotac card, I know some people don't like Zotac NVIDIA cards for some reason, but if you are, look at the discounts from last year. And these were great prices last year. Remember, it's been a whole year. So you're like, Jason, $989 RTX 4080, that sounds like this is when those things were still $1,200. The $519 4070, that's when those 4070s still cost $600. Remember that. So that was a pretty significant discount at the time. $249 3060. 3060s were still going up around $300 and something at that time. So it was a pretty significant discount on the 3060 as well. In terms of those discounts, who usually makes it rain? AMD usually makes it rain, both on their CPUs and their GPUs. They just cut them across the board. Now you say, Jason, right now I can pick up the Ryzen 7800 X3 for $339. Yes, right now you can. But this $349 price was the best price at the time. And it was totally insane because it had been going for around $400. So again, you saw a $50 discount on that. You saw a huge discount on some of the GPUs. We saw significant discounts on motherboards, on PC cases, and other types of PC gear. So should you buy now or should you wait for Amazon Prime Day and all the other associated sales? Well, obviously we are probably just weeks away. Normally I say don't wait for things that are too far away, more than a couple months, but we are just like right on top of it. So I definitely would be saving up my cash, picking out my parts, and getting ready for those sales. Of course, a lot of people might be wondering, am I going to be able to buy a Ryzen 9000 series CPU in time for Amazon Prime Day? And according to this report by WCCF Tech that just dropped like an hour or two ago as I'm filming this video, they're claiming that July 31st is going to be the availability of it. I don't know this for sure. You can take this with a grain of salt. This is just based on some other retailers around the world, not in the US, accidentally kind of putting up on their website and posting pricing. That historically has not been the best guide. So I just say take this with a huge grain of salt. Although you can buy, of course, all the other parts at the same time, and then just wait for Ryzen 9000, or just pick up 7800X3, maybe on super sale. Let's jump into some GPU questions, including, is your GPU gonna hold up under the new games that are coming down the pike? That's what Real Nazal wants to ask. Should they be concerned about modern GPUs underperforming in Unreal Engine 5 games? Benchmark shows the RTX 40 and RX 7000 series GPUs running Unreal Engine 5 games at about half the frame rate as other game engines. 4070 can't do 50 FPS at 1440p. The 4090 can't do 60 FPS at 4K. Considering how popular Unreal Engine 5 is among developers and all the games that are coming down the pike for it, they're worried that they're gonna have to upgrade their GPU sooner than planned. What do we think about that? All right, what is Unreal Engine 5? It's a game development engine that's risen up popular. It's relatively new, but we are seeing a lot of games scheduled to come out and some new games right now that just came out. We'll talk about that in just a second, that allow the development of these super photorealistic, high graphical fidelity games out there much easier than they would have done in the past. But just because game developers can develop these games better doesn't mean it's easier for your GPU to render that stuff, right? So what we're seeing is games that are coming out right now in Unreal Engine 5 are super hard on your GPU. Of course, the game that you're talking about is Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, and Tech Power Up did a whole benchmark of it. I just looked at it the other day. Yes, in fact, an RTX 4090 gets 57 average FPS. 57 average FPS, I had to just look it up because I was like, oh my gosh. And that sounds insane, right? Anybody out there with a 4K gaming monitor, you have to have a 4090 to run this. That's really gonna shrink down your pool of available gamers out there. And honestly, just looking at their sales numbers, look like it hasn't done very well. That could be one reason, because a lot of people did make a big deal about the system recommendations. They're recommending an RTX 3080 or an RX 6800 XT. That's like a $500+ GPU level just to play the game at the recommended settings, which is totally insane, right? So yes, I think a couple things. Number one, we're gonna see continued optimizations, both by the game developers before they launch. That would have really helped here. Number two, by AMD, NVIDIA, to some extent Intel, in order that their GPU architectures are supporting Unreal Engine 5. And we've already seen a little bit of this by AMD's made some noise, as so has NVIDIA on it. We're also gonna get additional optimizations, I believe, in Unreal Engine 5 itself. The developers of UE5 are gonna continue to tweak things as well. But even with all those optimizations, are you gonna have to buy a bigger GPU to play these games? Yes, you probably will. The same way that if you wanna play a lot of these games, you're having to buy a GPU with more VRAM right now, you're also gonna need a faster GPU as well. All right, we get questions all the time about CPU and GPU upgrades, especially when we're talking about older CPUs. What kind of GPU should you pair with them? And we do go through this in more detail in our how to upgrade a PC, which I'll leave the link down in the video description. But I wanted to take some of these because we just get these questions all the time. Ravakar asks, I have an 8600K, that's i5 8600K with an RTX 3060. Do I need an upgrade? They run 3 1080p monitors, all at 144 Hertz. They only use one of them for gaming. 8 years old, it gets 90 FPS most games with no ray tracing. Here's what I would say. Number one, if you are happy with the GPU performance that you have right now, there is no reason to upgrade. There's no reason to upgrade. If you're happy with 90 average FPS at 1080p in the games that you play, that's great. That's phenomenal. Are you CPU bottlenecked? Possibly with the 8600K and the RTX 3060 there. If you had like a 3060 Ti or a 3070, I'd say definitely you would be CPU bottleneck there. And I think the 8600K, it's 6 core, 6 thread. A CPU like that, I would not dump in a big GPU upgrade without also upgrading the platform. And you can do that pretty cheaply right now. That's the good news, is you can upgrade to something like a Ryzen 7600, or even if you wanted to go last generation, a Ryzen 5700 X3D right now for $199 if you want to go super ultra cheap, especially for those of you out there who are still on AM4. But I do get questions all the time, and I'm not exaggerating here, like 3rd and 4th generation Intel CPUs, and they're like, can I get a 4080? Yes, you can get a 4080, you can dump it in, but you're gonna be CPU bottleneck, and it's gonna be like you went out and got a 3050 instead, because that's the level of GPU performance you're getting. Remember, when I say get the biggest GPU that you can afford and then just get a CPU that won't bottleneck it, you can't ignore the second part of that sentence. You need a CPU that won't bottleneck it. And some of these older CPUs, anything like Ryzen 3000 and older, some of the Ryzen 5000 series CPUs that are non-X3D, and a lot of Intel all the way up to 10th and 11th gen are now bottlenecking these faster GPUs. So consider that before your next GPU upgrade. All right, Makula asks, what motherboard necessities do I recommend for first-time builders that they have on their motherboards? As a first-time builder, they felt like they wanted to spend more for all the bells and whistles to limit the work for themselves, like buying additional Wi-Fi and audio cards, but they don't want to waste money on one that has too many features because they have a budget 1440p build. They feel super confused. What do I recommend? Well, first I would say motherboards are super confusing. They are super confusing. That's why we started doing our motherboard buying guides a couple years ago, and they have been one of the more popular pieces of content on the channel as a result, because we go through like what are all the various features on the motherboard that you need to think about when you're buying it, and what ones should you be focused on. And then we break them down into categories in terms of budget, in terms of mid-range, and in terms of the more premium boards. I think that first-time builders can fall into one of two camps too often, which is either they want to buy the super ultra expensive board that has all the bells and whistles on it because they're fear of missing out, basically, of some kind of minor feature, or they go the opposite direction. They're looking for the super cut down garbage board out there that they can get away with so they can invest all their money in their CPU and GPU. And I know this is one of these, like, not too much that way, not too much this way, the just right approach. I would recommend the just right approach, right? It's the Goldilocks approach. Not too hot, not too cold. We want more the mid-range boards are typically what you're looking for. So for instance, let's talk about the B650 motherboards. You can get super expensive motherboards. This is one of them. This is like $250 motherboard. This is the Asus B650E-F Wi-Fi on it. And it's a great board, but I needed a lot of these features. I needed a lot of the higher end stuff because you're looking at what's processing all the video right here. So this was kind of a need on my behalf. For most gamers, however, this board is totally overkill. Now you can do it. If you've got a big budget, maybe this isn't such an expense. Otherwise, I would recommend taking a look at a lot of boards out there. On the more budget side for B650 motherboards, that's socket AM5, I really like the ProRS Wi-Fi here. This is by an ASRock board. Maybe you don't like ASRock though, so consider, for instance, the MSI B650M-A Pro, another great board. And it has just kind of the basic features on it. It's got good enough audio on it, kind of more entry-level audio. Got good enough VRMs on it to run any of the CPUs out there or the CPU that you're looking for. It's got a number of M.2 slots on it, which is great. And it's got a pretty good rear I/O section on it. So those are the things that I would really focus on. And again, check out our motherboard buying guides when Ryzen 9000 comes out. We will definitely publish an updated list of best Ryzen motherboards, especially for Ryzen 9000 out there. We do the same for Intel, and all those videos are linked down in our How to Build a PC playlist. So check those out. But that's what I would look for. Kind of, you're not looking to go and buy one of the garbage boards. You're not looking to like massively overspend. You kind of want to shoot in the middle if you can, because ultimately features like Wi-Fi and other things are great, but you can always add them in later. All right, Pepe asks, what are the benefits of the higher end motherboards then? So we just talked about getting a mid-range board. Why would you jump up to a board like this? Typically, you have more USB ports and they're higher speed USB ports than you get on the lower end boards. You also get more M.2 slots and they tend to be higher speed than they are on the lower end boards, or they're full speed ports as opposed to half speed ports, because this board here, while it has 3 M.2s, one of them is basically like half speed. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing is fan RGB headers, RGB on the board itself. You talk about the VRMs itself. That being said, a board like this, this is good enough to run a 7950X. So then, do you really need the VRMs on this board? Yes, they run cooler, but as long as they run within acceptable temperatures, it's almost like a who cares? Like, do you want to spend extra money to take the VRM temperature down a little bit if it doesn't matter, if they're both within acceptable limits? It's really hard to say. That's pretty much the major differentiator. Other than RAM speed, where it might be easier to clock up faster RAM on a board like this that probably has better traces because it's more expensive than a board like that. But you can still clock up DDR5 6000 CL30 memory really easily on this one. So again, It's getting harder and harder to differentiate. Now let's talk about the best 1440p GPU. Maybe it's the worst 1440p GPU. Maxi asks, does it really matter if they buy a bad value GPU? They're looking at the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, and they currently have a GT 730. That's not really relevant, but we'll talk more about that in just a second. This is going to be their first gaming and content creation PC, but they do data science and they need NVIDIA for that. Should they go with the value proposition and get the RX 7700 XT? First of all, the recommendations that I make for gaming assume that that GPU meets all of your needs. Typically for gamers, if they want to do content creation, none of these GPUs really offer that much of a benefit one over the other. If you're just going to do it as like on an amateur level, once in a while, if you're going to just stream to Twitch or YouTube your gameplay recording, things like that. These GPUs, in a lot of ways, there used to be big gaps between AMD and NVIDIA. AMD has largely closed the gap there. That being said, you're talking about AI data science, and if NVIDIA in their CUDA library is what you need, then yes, get a GPU that you need. You're talking about a professional application. If you have a professional application that will only work with NVIDIA GPUs, or obviously if an AMD application that only works with AMD GPUs, get the GPU that you need. If all you can afford is $449, which is what the 4060 Ti 16GB is selling for, get the GPU you need. Remember, my advice, I try and generalize it to an audience, and typically when we're talking about gaming GPUs, I'm focused on gaming. If you're somebody who has a niche specific use case, obviously you got to get what you need. To me, it doesn't matter what GPU you're coming from. You're coming from a trash tier GPU, that's okay. People upgrade from trash tier GPUs all the time. It's really about how are you getting the best value right now. I would also say if you're comparing the 4060 Ti 16GB, the value comparison is actually the 7800 XT 16GB, not the 7700 XT, because that's the same price, right? You're talking about a GPU that's significantly cheaper. And I see this done a lot of times with NVIDIA GPUs, where they take a much more expensive NVIDIA GPU and they compare it against a much cheaper AMD GPU because it has equivalent performance. And they're like, well, it seems super balanced. I will tell you, if you compare a 7800 XT to a 4060 Ti, it's no equivalent. It just blows that 4060 Ti 16GB out of the water at the same dollar spent. There's no amount of ray tracing or DLSS that's going to come save that 4060 Ti. But again, you have a very specific niche use case, which is you probably need that CUDA, access to that CUDA library. So get the best GPU for you. Hyphen-Track's got a great question. Is buying used GPUs, CPUs, motherboards worth it? They find themselves not wanting to buy used, even though they feel like it's totally worth the savings. We'll talk about that. I've never bought used, yet I'm willing to upgrade soon. Parts like AIOs, RAM, maybe even a GPU. First, let's talk about parts you never, absolutely never want to buy used. Never buy a used PSU. I know, like, you looking at these scrapyard wars, things that online is tech tips and stuff. Oh, they bought this cool used PSU. Yeah, but they don't have to deal with the fallout from it. PSUs tend to burn out the quickest of all the various components that make up a PC. That is the one I would definitely never buy. I would also not buy a used AIO liquid cooler because they typically last just 6, maybe 7 years before they permeate all the liquid out. And if you can't refill them, especially the ones that you can't refill, then what are you really buying? Air coolers, probably absolutely fine to buy used, but you're not saving a lot of money. You can get the Peerless Assassin SE120 for $33 right now, and that's an insane cooler. How much money are you really saving? The only components that have typically been worth it in the past have been CPUs and GPUs. If you talk about ultra budget GPUs below $100, you're probably gonna end up buying something used on the market. The ones that we've recommended, either the RX 570 or 588 gigabyte GPUs for around $50, or if you have $100 to spend, the GTX 1070 Ti, and even the 1080 can often be found for right around that price point, and they're very good values. And I would buy them over the GTX 1660 Super 6 gigabytes because of the VRAM difference there. But then as soon as you get up to $150, you can now find new GPUs. Does it make any sense to buy a used GPU? You'd have to have a significant performance difference. Now, I'm sure some of you out there, Jason, I buy used GPUs all the time. Great. If you feel like you can do that, you kind of got to know what you're looking for. If you're good at this and you know how to, zoom into that picture on that GPU, if you see a lot of dust in that thing after you zoom in terms of the cooler on it, I'd probably stay away from that thing. If they can't even bother to clean that out before taking a picture of it, how well have they actually kept up that GPU? And you don't have warranties and other things like that. Used made a lot more sense during the crisis of the GPU mining crisis, right? when you couldn't get a GPU to save your life. And so used stuff did have a lot better value. But now that prices have largely crashed in the GPU space, prices in the CPU space have absolutely cratered. You can get a Ryzen 5500 for less than $100 now. What is it, like $89, $85? You can get an i3 1200F for like $82. CPUs have cratered, GPU prices have cratered, and it's compressed the value. And as a result, I don't actually see a lot of value in the used market right now. So I'm fine with people staying away from it, especially given that if you do buy a used motherboard and you socket the CPU and you don't get a post, is that because the motherboard's bad? Is it because you haven't updated the BIOS? Like, you're just not gonna have the level of support you have on a new part. So I would go that route instead. Remember, if you got value out of this video, give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe. Click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. Hey, speaking of cool content, did you check out episode 1 of our Q&A? We talk about, is the GPU market saved? There have been a number of announcements at Computex that you really should check out if you're interested in the GPU market. Check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one.